Are the Washington Commanders a sleeper in the NFC East now that they have Dan Quinn? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. We've got a special guest today. It is David Harrison from Locked On Commanders. You can follow him on Twitter at DHarrison82. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the Commanders' new quarterback, Jayden Daniels, the expectations for him as a rookie. We'll talk about the Commanders as a possible sleeper in the NFC East. But, David, I want to start with our guy, Dan Quinn, who left Dallas to be the head coach for Washington. How are the vibes right now in Washington with DQ in charge?
They're good. They're real good. You know, Dan came in and if we're being honest, we're not being, revisionists of history here and not just trying to make everything sound good. He was not the top choice by anybody outside of Washington for that job. And I think that's just, the NFL is a copycat league, right? So everybody sees these new, young, first-time head coaches doing big things.
Who was the number one choice, by the way?
Who was?
Yes.
Ben Johnson. Yeah. I mean, by and large, I would say it was Ben Johnson, right? I like Mike McDonald out of Baltimore, the new Seattle Seahawks head coach, but Ben Johnson, I think, was by and large the number one on most people's list. And then, of course, they flew the team jet out to Detroit to talk to him in mid-flight or mid-takeoff or whatever it was. He told them that he wasn't going to be in the running. And eventually you end up with Dan Quinn, who again was probably fifth or sixth on most people's list. And I think they just didn't want the quote unquote retread, right? But from his introductory press conference forward, Dan Quinn has done nothing but put all those concerns to rest. Not that that was his intention necessarily. At the end of the day, he's only worried about the opinions of two people, Adam Peters and Josh Harris, as it relates to his job. But, coming into the introductory press conference, talking about the fact, and he said right off the bat, I'm not coming in here to kind of copy paste what I did before here in Washington. I've learned and I've grown and I've come to understand that you have to be able to change in order to survive and thrive in the NFL for a long period of time. And that alone got Commanders fans very excited because now you've got a guy who's obviously a little bit older, but he's got experience. He's got Super Bowl experience, and he's got, experience now crafting a top 5 defense in Dallas. And he's taking all these lessons and telling everybody, I'm not just going to be this, one trick pony who tries to run every single lap the exact same way, which is essentially what this franchise has seen with Ron Rivera previous to Dan Quinn's arrival. So that got a lot of people excited. And then just the messages, right? Every time he speaks at a microphone, you just feel the authenticity, you feel the honesty, and once we get into the practices, the messages that were being preached ahead of time started to show up on the field. And I think that's the best way to get a connection between your media group, but also your fan bases, to put the proof, out there. Words are one thing, but actions obviously speak louder.
So one of the concerns when you hire a defensive-minded head coach is, will the offense be able to be successful? Now, Dan Quinn's been very fortunate. He's hired some really good coordinators before, including Kyle Shanahan. How do you expect this offense to look? And we'll talk about Jayden Daniels in segment 2, but how do you expect this offense to look with Cliff Kingsbury running the offense?
Yeah, the scheme is going to be interesting, right? And that's the thing that we all kind of want to try to pinpoint as much as we can right now. And I don't think it's possible yet to really put kind of a definition of what this offense is going to be, because you're right. Dan Quinn, defensive-minded head coach, he's already said he's still going to have his hands kind of in the defensive pot a little bit, but it's Joe Witt Jr.'s, recipe to mix up and all that stuff. But he's still, he's a coach. He wants to be over there. You can see it when he goes over there with like D-line drills. Darryl Tapp is running the defensive line group. Coach Quinn is certainly vocal, and he's certainly tuned in to what's going on there. And it makes it a lot of fun as long as they can balance that kind of chemistry, right? And that's really the question on offense. Cliff Kingsbury's the offensive coordinator. at the end of the day, like his decision on what the offense is going to do is going to be final. But you also have Anthony Lynn, who's a former head coach, run game coordinator here for the Washington Commanders, running backs coach for the Commanders. A lot of experience, a lot of style in his repertoire that doesn't necessarily match completely with Cliff Kingsbury's. And on the other side of the offensive ball or part of the game, you've got Brian Johnson, who comes in from Philadelphia Eagles. He's got offensive coordinator experience. He's the pass game coordinator and the assistant head coach. And even he and his style in Philadelphia, a little bit different than what Cliff Kingsbury has. And I think it's really going to be just kind of a melting pot of styles. And what you're going to see from this Commanders offense isn't necessarily a Cliff Kingsbury offense, more as much as it is a mixture of all of these guys and what they bring to the table. I think that's why Marcus Mariota comes in to be the backup quarterback, because he knows Brian Johnson. So again, it's just a matter of blending all of these styles. And I think because of that, it's really hard to right now anyway pinpoint what this offense is really going to look like. But all three of those guys like big plays. They all like being aggressive. They all like putting points up on the board, because who doesn't? So aggression is going to be the overall theme from a Dan Quinn led team. And even though he's not going to be elbow deep in the offense, that's gonna thrive even with those other coaches involved.
So Dan Quinn's been the head coach for the Commanders for what, 4 months now, 5 months. Yeah. Have your feelings changed at all regarding Quinn? Because I know you mentioned you were hoping for maybe Mike McDonald or Ben Johnson. What do you think? How are you feeling personally about the hire?
Yeah, I mean, my putting Dan Quinn low on the list of like desired candidates wasn't necessarily a dig on Dan Quinn, more so a projection of just the way the NFL is operating. Again, like we see it all across the league every single year. The new young guy gets the job more often than the retread, right, is what they call it. But I'm confident what Dan Quinn is doing. I think at the end of the day, the message that he's putting out in public is the message that he's putting out in the locker room. And when you talk to the guys, right, you talk to the players. And I've always kind of said this, like, in a well-run organization, you kind of can see the left and right limits that everybody's operating in. And within those left and right limits, there's personal styles, right? But you all kind of see them dancing within those left and right limits that the leadership is setting. And when you talk to these players, whether it be Bobby Wagner or Terry McLaurin or Jayden Daniels or anybody, Tress Way, the punter, there's a commonality in the theme. It's not the exact same words, because that's a script, and that's what you don't want, right? When players are reading a script, you might have some problems. But they're all speaking the same type of language within the same kind of framework, like I said, but their personalities are shining through. The way that they interpret it is shining through. So I think everybody's on the same page, pulling in the same direction. And right now, like, that's just about as much as you can get. And I think that you can get as much confidence from it as you can from that type of environment that you're living in.
One thing we know about Dan Quinn is the players are going to love him, right? Like, they're going to play hard for him. They're going to practice hard for him. It's some of the execution stuff and Dan Quinn trying to figure out the balance of being very aggressive versus managing the game. But I've got no doubts that those players are absolutely going to love Dan Quinn. Let's talk about Jayden Daniels, the number 2 overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft, and his expectations going into this year. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. There's nothing more that I love than at the end of the day, sitting on my couch and just watching a couple different games. I actually have 3 screens in my living room so I can catch up on all of the action. But unfortunately, with the playoffs winding down, and no, we've got no basketball, we've got no hockey, obviously no NFL. The sports just aren't sporting like the way we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all of their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So just head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, we are back here with David Harrison from Locked On Commanders. So make sure you go check him out on Twitter at dharrison82. And David, let's talk about Jayden Daniels, who was, maybe the most fun prospect in this class. What are your expectations for him in year one now that you've gotten to see him on the field at least a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch him. I expect a lot of electricity. You know what I mean? The dude just loves to play ball. He loves every part of it. He loves the preparation part of it. He loves executing with his guys. He loves learning after every rep and all these things. Like you just tell when he's on the practice field, he's just a guy who just genuinely enjoys being in that environment. And I think that really helps a young quarterback really kind of start to get comfortable, because when you're motivated to want to do what it is you're doing, then obviously, I won't say it comes easier because it's not easy, but it can become a little bit less of a burden. And I think that kind of shows when you talk to his teammates, when you talk to his coaches, and a lot of guys, to a man, they're talking about how impressed they are with his professionalism. He's in there every morning at like 5:30 in the morning. He's one of the first, if not the first guys in the building. He's doing walkthroughs on his own with, fellow rookie receiver Luke McCaffrey has been out there doing those with him. He's doing independent tape study sessions with coaches. And obviously, as you could probably tell from Brandon Aiyuk's TikTok account, he's doing tape study on his own while he's on vacation. And, not every player necessarily does that. But then when he gets on the field, he's out there, he's prepared, he's in control of the huddle, he's in control of what's happening. He's adjusting players. And this is something that we saw at rookie camp. He would be out there with like Benson at the rookie tight end that they drafted out of Kansas State. And he'd say, hey, Ben, reduce that a little bit or push out a little bit or whatever it is. Or, hey, when you run this route, break a little bit deeper or whatever, whatever it is, just kind of mentoring his fellow rookies. And the question we all had was, okay, well, it's great with rookies, but is that going to stick with veterans? And then you talk to Terry McLaurin and he says, one of the first things that impressed him about Jayden was they ran a route specifically in their first practice together. It didn't go very well. So after they came off the field and their set was done, Jayden, and to me, what kind of stuck out is Jayden didn't go to Terry. Jayden said, hey, Terry, come here real quick. Terry McLaurin, the veteran receiver, right, comes over to Jayden, the rookie quarterback. And Jayden says, hey, later on, I want to run that again. Let's get some more reps on that and do that again. And for Terry, that stuck out to him because this is a kid who's not just going to go through his set, do what he does, take the notes and move forward. No, he wants to make sure that they come back and they get these things right. And what's really cool, kind of tying back into the Dan Quinn conversation, is, this coaching staff, every coaching staff has, a finite amount of hours and minutes that they can practice with their roster. And every coach handles it a little bit differently. Well, this coaching staff, led by Dan Quinn, they've got kind of, a bonus period at the end of practice. They leave this time open, and that's where you see the players get together and they work specifically. Some of the veterans like Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner are out there kind of working with these guys specifically on things, where they go with their position coaches and work on specific things that aren't necessarily part of the group session. That's where, there's some excitement about seeing Luke McCaffrey taking handoffs and all that stuff. And that's where all that stuff is happening. And that's where you see a guy like Jayden Daniels really get to kind of shine as a leader, because he's not just like wandering around the field, laughing, smoking, and joking with guys. He's out there getting extra reps and he's getting extra dropbacks. He's working with these players and he's taking charge while he's doing it. So, as long as that leadership kind of continues and is consistent, then I think he's really on a good pace. Obviously, the biggest concern to his long-term success is how smart he is with his body on the football field. Yeah. But that's something that we can't evaluate just yet. But he knows. Right, he's been asked about it 100 times since he left LSU, but he knows he's got to be smarter in the NFL. The question is he going to be smarter in the NFL?
Oh, that was going to be my next question, the state of the offensive line, because Jayden Daniels is going to hang in the pocket. He's going to throw while he's getting hit. He's going to take off and run. And I think there's at times he does it smartly. I think he does it a pretty good job of avoiding hits. And there's other times where he goes full Johnny Knoxville and just doesn't care about his body, right? What is the state of the offensive line going into the season?
Yeah, it's up in the air. Honestly, like that's just the best way to put it. I think that, right tackle Andrew Wiley is pretty solidified in his position. Right guard Sam Cosmi, who's, some people ranking like the top 10 of his position group, is solidified in his spot. Tyler Biotish, you guys are very familiar with. I think he's locked in as the center. I don't see any real competition going on there, even though Coach Quinn likes to say there's competition everywhere. Got it. But I think Tyler is pretty confident in his position on the team. And I think starting there, Nick Gates came in last year, was a guard for the Giants, did some center stuff for the Giants, but was largely a guard, came in, wanted to be a center for the Washington Commanders, had the attitude, right? The requisite, nasty, kind of physical, ready to scrap at any moment type of attitude, but the consistency in his play just wasn't there. He's a little undersized for the position, so that certainly didn't help matters. I think with Tyler, I don't know if you're going to get as much, junkyard-ish personality from him, but you're going to get more consistent play. And I think you'd rather have that than than the overly junkyard personality. And again, the expectation is that Tyler's going to be setting the protection. He's going to be calling the rushers out and everything else. So you want that veteran presence. And I think so far he's really brought that. Left guard, left tackle is really where the questions lie. The favorite at left guard is Nick Allegretti, comes over from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's the one who had the elbow injury, played in the Super Bowl anyway, or finished Super Bowl anyway. So toughness, check. Like you can mark that off. Don't even have to question it. But now we got to see the rest of it. And on tape, he gets to the second level really well. And Marcus as well as anybody else, like these new high-flying, big play type of offense, even the run game, they want their linemen to get from the first level to the second level real quick, open up those second holes, and get us a 10-yard, 12-yard gain. Nick Allegretti looks like he does that very, very well. I think he's the favorite to be the starting left guard. Michael Dieter is competing with him behind him. I just don't see the same type of athletic ability, explosiveness, and consistency on the line from him as I do Allegretti. So I've got Allegretti penciled in there. And then left tackle, as much as it would pain everybody to say for your team, the most important, arguably, position on your offensive line when you've got a right-handed quarterback, especially a rookie who likes to hold the ball, like you said. That's the question. That's the biggest question. Cornelius Lucas, the veteran, has never been a true starter. He's started, but he's never been the guy. There's arguably a reason for that. Brandon Coleman's a rookie. He's a third-round pick. Played guard, played right tackle, played left tackle at TCU, but, a lot of people projected him to be a guard. The Commanders are trying to take those guard skills, convert them to a tackle in the NFL. We'll see how that goes. I think, if I had to give a lean one way or the other, I'd probably go Cornelius Lucas just because he is kind of the veteran, and I think if it's a close race, the Commanders are probably more likely to go with the guy that we know from history more than the new guy who, you might be a little bit better when you're at your best, but the problem is you're at your worst more than this guy's at his worst type of situation. And that's just that, it's an uncomfortable spot to have in your left tackle room, but that's kind of where we are with this offensive line. A lot of rotation, a lot of competition to come. And, Marcus, you pay attention to the Giants as well because of the NFC East. Bobby Johnson, their former O-line coach, he's in Washington now. And a lot of Giants fans and media were very upset with him last year because it took them a very long time into the preseason before they finally settled on a starting five. And the question was always kind of, did they actually have enough time to really gel before the regular season came? And you could kind of see the Commanders maybe going that direction this season. But I hope that, at least by the second preseason game, they've got their starting five figured out.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the offensive line, not only because it's really important, but you look inside the division. I mean, the Giants trading for Brian Burns this offseason and adding him with Dexter Lawrence and Thibodeau. You've got Philadelphia with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Josh Sweat. I mean, they're just absolutely loaded. And then, of course, the Cowboys have Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, also Digizua. Like, you better figure out your offensive line quick. And if you don't, it's going to be hard for any quarterback in Cliff Kingsbury's offense to be successful. David, I wanted to mention one more thing that you actually brought up. Brandon Aiyuk buzz. Now, listen, I know a lot of this is social media stuff, and it's Jayden Daniels and Brandon Aiyuk being boys from their days at Arizona State. But do you think there's any chance that an Aiyuk trade could happen?
I mean, you can't say there's not a chance, right? Because we already know the Commanders and the Niners. So GM Adam Peters in Washington and John Lynch in San Francisco, they had a talk. They had talks about trading Brandon Aiyuk to Washington. My understanding is that was pre-draft. You know what I mean? And obviously it didn't go through. The Niners were probably looking for current year capital as well as 2025 capital. And obviously that ship has sailed. But as long as there's not a deal in place between Brandon Aiyuk and the San Francisco 49ers, and as long as he's doing things like this, and again, it's tongue in cheek, it's intended to stir a reaction, it stirs a reaction, and they just sit back and laugh about it, and that's fine. But I still look at it and say, if he thinks or if he knows a deal is imminent with the 49ers, because Brandon Aiyuk has said he wants to stay with the Niners. But if a deal is imminent with the Niners, he's not doing this kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't believe that he's still doing, even if it's just mostly tongue in cheek. And you look at the relationship between him and Jayden Daniels, they're best friends that go back to Arizona State. And you think about Jayden Daniels' first year in college football was Brandon Aiyuk's last year in college football. So that amount of time has stretched. They're still best friends. They're still spending pretty much every moment they can in the offseason together. Like, that's how tight these two guys are. So of course they want to play together, right?
Of course.
Now, it doesn't necessarily mean Brandon Aiyuk would force the Niners to trade him to Washington if that situation came. Like, it's at the end of the day, it's a business. If the Steelers come in higher on the pay scale, the Niners are going to take that deal, and Brandon Aiyuk's going to go out there. He's going to try to ball out for the Steelers and show the Niners that they were dumb. So, there are multiple truths here that, the Brandon Aiyuk is not settled with the Niners yet. He wants to play with Jayden Daniels again, but it also could just never happen. So it's just a lot of fun, I think, to watch it unfold because it's mid-July and we're not training camp's not here yet. But right now, for me, and I keep telling my insiders this, right now it's just fun to watch. Just enjoy the show. But don't go buy your custom Brandon Aiyuk jerseys just yet.
All right, let's talk about the Commanders potentially being a sleeper in the NFC East. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Everydayers. On tomorrow's show, we've got Elliot Harrison, formerly from the NFL Network, coming on to talk about some Cowboys history, including best rivalries. Maybe the Washington Commanders might make that list. So make sure you guys tune in for that. But we're finishing up here with David Harrison from Locked On Commanders, talking about expectations for Washington this year. David, do you believe that the Commanders have a chance to potentially compete for the division crown in year one under Dan Quinn?
I believe there's a chance. I'd probably put it at like a 33% chance. You know what I mean? Like it's not a high chance. And I think that if it happens, if it comes to fruition, then there's got to be some things that happen in Dallas and Philadelphia that help the Washington Commanders along the way. And I don't just mean the Commanders at least splitting those series. Obviously, that's what you would want to see, is at least a split. You'd love to see a Washington sweep on this end of the business. I don't know how realistic that is right now, but both the Cowboys and the Eagles are in very interesting situations because both are obviously incredibly talented rosters. Both have some very accomplished coaches on their staffs, but it's the internal drama that I'm wondering is how quickly, if it does at all, honestly, because it could just not be a non-factor this season, obviously, but if it becomes a factor, how quickly does it become a factor and how corrosive is it? Because a lot of people look at Mike McCarthy and predict that this is his last year in Dallas. A lot of people look at Dak Prescott and say this could be his last year in Dallas. And you look at guys like CeeDee Lamb, who are not going to be happy if they're putting their body on the line, playing a full season, and they're looking around them and they're like, what are we doing this for? Like, this is pretty much all going to be a reset next year. Why am I out here diving for passes? Why am I out here putting my body on the line against a safety over in the middle of the field? Why am I doing all these things when you may not even be here next year? Or heck, I may get sick of it all and force my way out of here next year. I don't know if that's a realistic possibility, but so if those things in Dallas kind of start to stew, and obviously early losses would be a big part of that. The Commanders can't contribute to that because their games against Dallas are later in the year, at least late enough that if there's drama, it's probably already going to be started by the time they see each other the first time. And then in Philadelphia, I mean, Marcus, look, I've pulled no punches on this. Like, I used to like Nick Sirianni from afar. I didn't really know him, obviously didn't know the operation, but last year just showed me one big thing about Nick Sirianni is that he's not a leader. And if you have a non-leader in your head coaching position, your team is in a very bad situation. Now the Eagles go out and they hire Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore to run their units. And basically you've got two, I look at them as two separate teams. Like the defense is one Eagles team, the offense is one Eagles team. Then you got Nick Sirianni in the middle, who's going to try to sell everybody that it's one unified front. It's not a unified front. And if they start losing games, again, the blame game starts. I go back to like the Houston Oilers and their coordinator drama that they used to have. And it's like, well, no, it's your fault that we lost. No, it's your fault that we lost. And Nick Sirianni is just standing in the middle waiting to drop the next buzzworthy quote or shake a fan's hand. And it just seems like a recipe for disaster, right? So if those things start to roost again in Philly takes a step back because of dissent, because of drama. Dallas potentially in the same situation. That obviously helps Washington. So, I mean, I did a regular season prediction scenario of like, what if that all happens and Washington can take advantage and win the NFC East because of it? And I think I had the Commanders at like 9 or 10 wins and winning the division. And obviously, if you're winning this division with 9 or 10 wins, it's because the teams that are quote unquote at the top of the division fell in a very serious way. So I think that's the scenario that it would take place in. And that's why I give it a chance, because it certainly is possible. These are human beings after all.
It's not, I was gonna say, it's not too dissimilar from the situation that happened in 2020. That's the year that Dak Prescott got hurt in week 5. The Giants were clearly in transition with Daniel Jones being in year 2. Philadelphia was tanking at that point, and Washington won the division, and they played a really good game against Tampa in round 1 of the playoffs. I mean, maybe that could happen. I could see a situation where Philly looks very combustible at this point. Now, there's a chance that they win some early season games and they start to, build some momentum and some character together. But that happened last year. They went 10-1 to start the year, and then one loss just completely derailed them. So I'm always glad when I can talk to another fellow NFC East host and we can just bag on the Eagles the whole time because it's therapeutic, right? Even better help can't even help you this much.
No, absolutely. And I mean, and I have to say, like, of the two situations, like you said, I think the Eagles situation is much more combustible. I think that it's more likely that comes to fruition than in Dallas. Cause I just kind of look at Dallas. I'm like, yeah, we've heard about, well, the Dallas Cowboys are now they're going to be trash. Now they're going to be out. Now they're not going to be, but the Dallas Cowboys always just kind of find a way. And look, Commanders fans are going to hate hearing me say this, but as much as people hate the Cowboys, as much as people don't want the Cowboys to be in the postseason or, quote unquote favorites for anything, the NFL is better when the Cowboys are relevant. You know what I mean? Like when the Cowboys are just one of those teams. You look at like college football, and like Ohio State is one of those teams too. Like a lot of people hate Ohio State, but when Ohio State is relevant, the college game is just better for the landscape. The Dallas Cowboys are one of those teams too. So, I'm
personally, I feel like as long as Dak Prescott is relatively healthy, they are going to be competitive. Now, the degrees of competitiveness we can argue, like I'm not sure even if the Cowboys are fully healthy, they're going to be able to make noise in the NFC playoffs. But I do think if Dak is healthy, they are going to be a 9 to 10, 11 win team, which puts you right in the conversation. And I think maybe that's the difference with Dallas compared to Philly, where we've seen, Jalen Hurts, even healthy, that offense can still be up and down. But with Washington, it's interesting. It's just going to be fascinating how quickly Dan Quinn can fix that defense because all-time bad last year. Can you get it to be respectable in year one, or is he going to need a full year of churning this roster before he can get them to the place that he wants them to be?
I honestly think it's going to take at least 2 years because when you look at the guys they brought in, like Dorrance Armstrong is in on a multi-year deal, but just about everybody else is on a 1-year deal. I think Frankie Louvu also has a multi-year deal. But then you look at the holdovers, right? Benjamin St. Juste is in a contract year. Emmanuel Forbes is on a rookie contract that obviously people don't love to get out of, but if you need to, it's not going to completely tank your organization. Jonathan Allen, you know what I mean? He can be let go next year, and the Commanders will actually save money. So this year to me is much more of a fact-finding mission than it is a go out there and compete for a division title. Obviously the team's going to be competitive every single week as much as they can be because nobody's going to tell these guys to go out there and take that amount of punishment for nothing. But I really feel like Adam Peters has set this roster up to where they can go through this season, figure out what their identity is going to be, figure out who fits that identity in 2024, keep the guys that you need to keep to facilitate that next offseason, either through extensions or just not releasing them, and then go out there and find more pieces that actually fit what you're trying to do. And I just, with Emmanuel Forbes, like the aggression, the physicality that he's going to be expected to play with in this defense, I don't know that he fits. Benjamin St. Juste, kind of the same situation, obviously not as rail thin, but some questions about his physicality level and all those things. And like you mentioned, that secondary, man, was just terrible. And 3 of the 4 starting projected players in that secondary are returning from last year's group. Quan Martin was more a slot last year than a free safety. This year he's gonna be a free safety, and he was arguably one of the better parts of it. So there's that. But Benjamin St. Juste was the number 2 corner on that defense, and now he's the number 1. Emmanuel Forbes was the number 3 rotational first round rookie, and now he's battling for the number 2 job. He might not even win the number 2 job. You know what I mean? So if you had that situation, it's just a lot of questions about the pass rush getting better. You kind of expect that to happen with the pieces they brought in and the coaches that they have and all that stuff. But is that enough to hide the secondary? And even if it is enough to hide the secondary, if you're hiding your secondary, that means you need to go improve it. So I'd still see a good amount of turnover probably on next year's Commanders defense compared to this year's. But yeah, we'll see how it all unfolds. But I do think this is a multi-year total situation. So, when you look at it that way, in some ways, like it might actually be better if the Commanders finish 3rd or 4th in the division so they can rebuild it faster. Nobody wants to hear that in July of 2024.
But you never know with the rebuild. I think a lot of people thought the Texans last year were in stage 1 of their rebuild, and all of a sudden they're in round 2 of the playoffs. So it can happen really, really quickly. Cowboy fans are hoping that it doesn't. Obviously, Commander fans hope that it will. That is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. We'd like to thank David Harrison from Locked On Commanders for joining the show. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at DHarrison82. You can follow both of our shows on YouTube and download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.